All right, we're up. This is a little we're gonna start. We're 21 minutes late, but that's all right. We'll get everybody in here. I have to delete the other post I did. Okay, actually, let me go and do this on my MacBook. Hey, how's it going? God bless as well. Let me just delete this real quick. I gotta announce this as well. There's some stuff I gotta get done, but this is hopefully gonna be a good stream. I don't know how many people we're gonna pull in, and I can't see how many viewers are active right now, but we'll find out. What are some of the books on your shelf? The Summa Theologiae. I have Summa Contra Gentiles. So basically, I have like Aquinas, I have Church Fathers, all that good stuff. So I have to delete the previous live. 7 viewers right now. Okay, we'll wait. Obviously, I gotta delete the other one because I think people are gonna go to the other live. So it's weird how I have to set it up, but basically, this is like 2 separate lives right now. There's one more live that's like supposed to be happening, and I think people are thinking that's the way it's gonna, it's gonna be that one. But let me just delete that one. Where do you get your books from? Amazon. You can get some Barnes and Noble's books. But mostly Amazon, I would say. They have a lot of general books. Let me see here. All right, and then I'll announce this as well. Wow, this is 1 page and it's already cringe. Yes, you guys are gonna love this book. It's gonna be so great. All right, I'm just fixing this up. I got my MacBook right here, so we got 14 viewers now. All right, view. So let me add this in. All right, we'll get started soon. We'll get some more people in here. Last time we had 72 people, and I don't know if it was like the day or people getting out of like work or whatever. So I don't know. Right now we got 16 people, I believe. So we'll give it a second, and then I just announced it, so usually more people come in. I'll put it in main chat as well. But yeah, so we're gonna cover Dawkins in his attempt to refute Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor himself, Thomas Aquinas. Okay. So yeah, I think it's gonna be good. We'll see. This is the atheist equivalent of Frank Turek trying to critique Grant Moppy. That's a true statement. I'm willing to grant. All right, we got 21 viewers now. Nice. Love your videos. Thinking about converting soon. I pray for your conversion. I hope that you all may go well. This is about to be so based. So true, man. All right, I think that's pretty much everywhere. I mean, announcements. All right, that should be good. That should cover everything. And we got 21 people, which is actually not bad. So we'll see. I don't know if there's any more people. We had like a consistent 40. So I don't know. But I hope you guys enjoy my. No one has said anything yet, but if you guys have looked at my background, I decorated a little bit for you guys. you got some pumpkins, some some. I put like a little Roman helmet. You know, I don't know. I tried. And then I got the leaves coming down. So, are you gonna read the Book of Mormon next? No, but maybe I'll make a video on that in the future, sooner than later, which I'm actually kind of excited for. But I have to do a little bit more research. I don't want to misrepresent them or their position. So we'll see. There was a lot of, I'm not gonna lie, there was a lot of technical difficulties trying to set this up. So just keep that in mind. What's up, desk? What's up, Filio? Who else we got here? Have you read City of God? I've read about a quarter of it. I haven't finished it yet, but I have read about a quarter of it. And it was pretty good. I didn't get like crazy into it, and I definitely need to come back to reading it, but it's a very long book. I think it's like, let me pull it out right now. This would be bad, but it's a thick book. I'm not gonna lie. I got to page 225, and it's over 1,000 pages. It's a very thick book. So I debunked my first sheik because of you. Amen. BTW, nice Halloween decoration. Thank you. All right, we got 37 people. That's pretty good. I'll have to put that back later because I don't want to get up right now on stream. Expose myself. But yeah. Guys, ask questions. Let's get this chat going. Come on. 50 euros? Yeah. That's kind of, I think mine's a Penguin Classics. I also do have the City of God right up there in the Church Fathers set. So, yeah. What if the argument for motion gets debunked in the future? Well, it's a demonstrative argument, so I don't think it will. What book are we looking at right now? So this is the book we're looking at. This is it's kind of hard with the lighting, but The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. So Richard Dawkins, and we're actually going to do a little debate review. We're going to cover one of his debates with Lennox. I don't necessarily hold to Lennox's views. I think he's like a Protestant, actually. But we're going to cover one of his debates, and it's based on this. Oh shoot! I just hit my mic. It's based on this book that they're debating. So they're probably not going to touch on Aquinas's proofs, but I just like want to go through it and kind of show you guys like the error in like people like Richard Dawkins in their thinking. I just want to like go over that and show you guys like how one would go about like refuting that. So we'll look at a little bit of the video. We're definitely not going to watch the whole thing. You know, it's like an hour and 43 minutes. But first we're going to do his little passage on the book. Can you respond to Majesty of Reason? He understands the argument better than Dawkins. So I actually would like to. I really do like Majesty of Reason. I like his videos. I think he's very fair. So I do want to cover his videos against the argument for motion. He has a lot of articles. He's a very smart guy, so it would definitely be a very intellectual, I guess, like, journey if I did get into his material. So eventually one day in the future, I would like to make a video, either a video or like an article, like an academic article on his writing. I know that some people have, like, for example, Gavin Kerr. I actually have his book right here. He's touched on existential inertia, which was proposed by Joe Schmidt, who is Majesty of Reason, and Graham Oppie. Let me see what else we got here. Question: what distinguishes Christ from any similar divine Roman emperor? They were called human and also of divine heritage. Isn't that similar to the incarnation? So No, because we believe that, Christ is fully God and fully man. And so the Roman emperors would not be considered like the ultimate deity, the ultimate God, whereas Christians hold Jesus to be the supreme and ultimate being, the supreme and ultimate God. So we can distinguish Jesus from other Roman gods by simply showing that Jesus is the ultimate being, the ultimate God of all creation. So yeah, that's what I would say in response to that. I read this book in Dawkins Cook. That's a very interesting opinion. We'll cover that. uh, you know, I don't necessarily agree with like Dawkins. I think Dawkins, and we'll see this. I think when we get into the video, but Dawkins like hypes up evolution as if it debunks Christianity. I think it's kind of insane. What else we got here? Yeah. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions, but we can just get into this a little bit. But yeah. All right, yeah. All right, so basically, you guys can ask questions throughout, or you can ask off-topic questions as well. I'm doing pretty good. How are you? I'm doing good. Um, so basically, you guys can ask questions throughout. Unionist Initiative with a $5 donation. Thank you. And actually, guys, go sub to Unionist Initiative. They make great content. So if you guys are not sub, go follow him. Thank you for the 5. Yeah, if you guys especially want me to look at a question or whatever it may be, you guys can do a super chat. Obviously, you don't have to, but if you guys want me to especially see it, because obviously there's a lot of comments. So if you guys want to help support, you can also help support buying some of my merchandise that I do have. But nonetheless, thank you guys for any support. All right. Hi from South Africa. Hi. All right. So basically, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. This book was kind of made to refute, religion in general. And so it was truly a lousy attempt. Now, the only good part you could technically say that he did a good job at is the part on evolution. But that's only if you're a Christian who rejects evolution. So I think he puts good, arguments forward for evolution. And I think he also fails a little bit, though, when he gets into the psychology of religion. I think he kind of, I think it's a little silly. But we're going to get into that. But specifically, right now, what we're looking at is his critique of Thomas Aquinas. So in his book, The God Delusion, he spends about 1 or 2 pages covering Thomas Aquinas. So for someone such as Thomas Aquinas, who has had such an influence in the realm of theology, in demonstrating God's existence, Richard Dawkins spends 2 pages, not even 2 pages, barely 2 pages. So he covers that. So today we're going to look at his critique of the cosmological arguments. So let me actually just switch over real quick. All right. So I can't actually see chat right now. So I might actually read it from here. So yeah, we can get into this. Keep in mind, to debunk Aquinas' arguments, he spends 2, maybe 3 pages, but I think 2 pages he spends debunking Aquinas' argument, right? So we've had such vast literature on Thomism. I mean, look at all of Aquinas' works behind me. And truly, Dawkins thinks that writing 2 pages is sufficient to refute, Thomas Aquinas, which is actually kind of insane. So we're going to get into that. I think we can start off. And if you guys have any questions, we can get into that as well. How can a Christian Catholic hold to evolution? Well, it depends what kind of evolution. So there are different forms of evolution. There's, for example, I guess evolution which is brought forth, theologically speaking, by God. So we wouldn't say necessarily like, there's some views of evolution that say that life can come out of non-life, and I think people like Garrigou-Lagrange have good critiques to that position, in that it's kind of illogical to hold that position, that life can come from non-life. And I definitely would have to do a little bit more studying into his critiques. I don't know Garrigou-Lagrange's critiques offhand, but that's the position of evolution that I guess I would also kind of reject. But there is some, to some extent, evolution, and that we don't interpret, for example, like Dave Verboom talks about this, that, we have to be careful how we interpret the scriptures. We don't take them literally in all aspects. Did God really create all creation in 6,000 years? So there is, to some extent, that Christians can hold to some forms of evolution. We do have to affirm Adam and Eve were real people, though. So we have to be careful. Yeah, theistic evolution. I mean, I haven't solidified my position on evolution, I'm not going to lie. But I do hold to a form of it, I would say. Of course not the evolution proposed exactly by, naturalists that we have now. Are you doing a theology degree? Yes, I am. I'm a theology undergrad. Okay. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get into this argument. So, Richard Dawkins says, the 5 proofs asserted by Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century don't prove anything, and are easily, though I hesitate to say so, given his eminence, exposed as vacuous. So, we got $5 dono from Kason the Christian. If you guys, he actually has good content on theistic arguments, so go give him a follow as well. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for the 5. All right. So Aquinas continues, or no, not Aquinas. Dawkins continues forth. The first 3 just are different ways of saying the same thing and can be considered together. So he says, all involve an infinite regress. The answer to the question raises prior questions, and so on to ad infinitum. So the issue with this proposition, he said, this is a very big thing. He says that they can all be, there are different ways of saying the same thing. Now, this is very problematic because Aquinas' arguments, the 3 specifically, which are types of cosmological arguments, are based off metaphysical principles. So the first one is based off motion, which is the act-potency distinction. The second one is based off efficient causality. And then the third one is the contingency argument. Now, these are very different types of metaphysical, realities in the world. And yet, for some reason, he thinks that you can just collapse them. And so he kind of commits like a type of equivocation fallacy in this. And it's silly. Now, I will be, I'll agree to some extent in that they have similar structure, but the principles used, such as motion, such as efficient causality, such as contingency, these are completely different. So let me see if there's anything. All right. We continue forth. So this is how he explains the unmoved mover. And if you guys have any questions on this, just type it in chat. It could literally be off topic too. That's fine. The unmoved mover. Nothing moves without a prior mover. This leads us to an infinite regress, or to a regress from which the only escape is God. Something had to make the first move, and that's something we call God. So notice he doesn't talk about the distinction between a per se and per accidens causal chain, right? Per se being like an essentially ordered causal series, right? One which is a chain of like kind of dependency, right? Where each member is dependent on the previous member. So for example, in the example of the unmoved mover, the rock moves in virtue of the fact that it is moved by a stick. The stick moves in virtue of the fact that it is moved by the hand, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to this dependency, each member in the causal series only moves in virtue of the previous member, right? The rock receives its motion from the stick receives its motion from the hand. That's per se. Now, what you're going to see is that Dawkins conflates what is kind of like a linear or like a per accidens causal chain, one which takes place over time, and he conflates that with a per se causal chain, right? So we can get into this a little bit more, but if you guys have any questions, just let me know, and I'll explain. So then he explains the uncaused cause. So this is the second. So Aquinas had 5 ways. This is the second of the 5 ways. Dawkins explains it as such. The uncaused cause, nothing is caused by itself. Every effect has a prior cause, and again, we are pushed back into regress. This has to be terminated by a first cause, which we call God. So yeah, I think honestly that he leaves out a lot of information. Like, yet again, he leaves out the per se causal series. Oh, what's up, Pine Sap? Is Sanctus really a Catholic? Yes, I am a Roman Catholic. All right. The cosmological argument. So I'm actually going to have to go on to. There must have been a time. So before we get even into this argument, notice how he calls it the cosmological argument instead of the contingency argument. Oh, I don't know where he got that name from, but that's what he calls it. So whatever. He says, there must have been a time when no physical things existed, but since physical things exist now, there must have been something non-physical to bring them into existence, and that's something we call God. He doesn't mention necessary beings. He doesn't mention contingent beings. He just throws the metaphysics out the door. He doesn't talk about the basics of the argument. Yeah, so we'll continue forth to his critique. Let me just switch the page, actually. Or I'll scroll down. So, this is his critique. This is where the critique comes in, mainly. Bro, is Duncan on Dawkins out here? Duncans. All 3 of these arguments rely on the idea of a regress and invoke God to terminate it. They make the entirely unwarranted assumption that God himself is immune to the regress. So, the issue with this is Dawkins doesn't realize that we aren't just asserting that God is the only, this is not like a God of the gaps. Love the decorations. Thank you. This is not just asserting that, this is a God of the gaps type argument. We're just going to assert that, God's the being which solves the issue. No, when you look at the argument for motion, what you have is a chain of, right? So we have the act potency distinction, right? So this cup of coffee has the potential to be put down. My hand actualizes that potential, that passive potency which it receives. In the chain, which is, for example, like the rock has the potential to be moved, and that potential is actualized by the stick. So the stick brings that potential into reality. The stick has the potential to be moved, and the hand actualizes that potential and brings that into reality. So in this chain, unless we're going to say that it goes on to infinity, because if it can't, because it only moves in virtue of a primary mover, therefore we would necessarily have to say that if the chain can't go on to infinity, it can't, whatever the first primary member of the series is, it cannot have any potentiality, because then that chain would go back onto infinity. So if it is the case that the chain can't go back onto infinity, like I said, so I'll repeat, if it is the case that the chain can't go back onto infinity, it necessarily must stop at something which is pure act, because if that thing, that first member, had anything which is any potential, that potential would necessarily need to be actualized by a previous mover. But we know it can't go back onto infinity, right? So it necessarily must resolve in a primary mover, which is pure act. So we're not just saying, oh, like God of the gaps, right? So let's just assert God. No, we're going to say that he is a metaphysical necessity for this causal chain to operate at all, right? If there is no first mover, right? So for example, like if I have like a plug, I'm trying to think like, yeah, if I have a plug and I plug that into, say, like a extender, and I do that infinitely, there's going to be no electricity. You must start at something which is, the first member which provides electricity for the entire chain, right? So we're not just like asserting it, right? This is a metaphysical necessity. So Dawkins has no idea what he's talking about. All right, let me look at chat for a second. Dawkins uses more rhetoric than logic. That is so true, man. But if God is real, who created God? Oh my gosh. Pinesap. I think Pinesap just like refuted theism right there. That's crazy. Yeah. All right, we can continue forth. So so this is what he says, even if we allow the dubious luxury of arbitrarily conjuring up a terminator to an infinite regress and giving it a name, simply because we need one, there is absolutely no reason to endow that terminator with one of the properties normally ascribed to God: omnipotence, omniscience, goodness, creativity of design, to say nothing of such human attributes as listening to prayers, forgiving sins, and reading innermost thoughts. All right. So, first off, we can actually come to the conclusion that this being, for example, which is purely actual. So, for example, the argument for motion would necessarily conclude at a being which is immutable, which is pure actus purus. And that being, from that point, that it is immutable, we can actually posit many like attributes, divine attributes that necessarily follow forth from it being immutable. And that's how we come to the conclusion that this being, this first member, is God. This is what Garrigou-Lagrange argues. This is what St. Thomas Aquinas argues. If you literally read Summa Contra Gentiles, Aquinas literally goes over this very issue. So Richard Dawkins has no idea what he's talking about. He has literally isolated. This is what he did. He took the page of the 5 ways from the Summa Theologiae. He took the one page that had the 5 ways on it, and he ripped it out of the whole entire book. Right? And this is Dawkins. He's basically saying, Aquinas is just asserting these things. No, he's not. Right? That's like if I took out a page from Richard Dawkins' book on evolution and I just said, Richard Dawkins is just asserting evolution. No, because Richard Dawkins has the entirety of the book. Right? So I think this is a fault. This is a fault of Richard Dawkins to rip out what Aquinas has to say on the attributes of God. In fact, if you literally read the Summa Theologiae, what Aquinas does is he starts with God's existence. So in question 2, Article 2, whether God exists, he goes forth whether God is simple, the perfection of God, the infinity of God. So if Dawkins just continued, he would get his answers that he's so longing for. But of course he didn't. Right? He ripped it out of context. Completely rips it out of context. So this is like, this type of like argument against the argument for motion, this objection, this is like low tier. Like we have some like better objections, better philosophers, Graham Oppie, right? We have some people who have actually like contributed some thought into what they're saying. They have actually read the literature. Richard Dawkins is not. He's not. So it's kind of a shame, in my opinion. Like I don't know how he got past like, did no one peer review this text? Did no one say, like, hey, maybe you should read some of, like, the rest of the book that you quoted from? I don't know. I think you're being generous, assuming he actually read the Summa. It's quite possible he did not. I don't think he did. He either read the 5 ways, just like, because I'll show it right here. The 5 ways. So this is question 2, article 2. Let me pull it up real quick. So, the existence of God, article 2. Oh, it's article 3, forgive me. Yeah. So, article 3. So, in this book that I have, the 5 ways start from right here, and they end about right here. So, about less than a page. What I think Richard Dawkins either did was rip this out, or he got it from secondary literature. Because I don't know how he genuinely refuted Aquinas, right? By doing that. I don't know why he thought that this was a sufficient response. I don't know. Nonetheless, like I was saying, I'll give you an example. He says we can't demonstrate that this first mover is omnipotent. Well, we actually can. By the very fact that he is the cause of all beings and that he keeps all beings in existence and can bring forth all that is in existence, he necessarily would be omnipotent. By the very fact that he keeps all things in existence and can bring forth all things in existence. That is what we mean by omnipotence. Right? We can demonstrate that he's immaterial by the fact that he can't be made up of matter. Because if he was made up of matter, then he would have the potential to change. So it's very, very easy to actually demonstrate these attributes. And there's so much literature on this fact. Lagrange talks about this. Even Phaser in the modern day talks about this. And I think even Phaser wrote works around the time. I mean, like, I'm not like a Phaserite. I'm not an analytical Thomist, but, I'm more of a, like strict observant Thomist. So, but even Phaser has made critiques. I mean, even Phaser has refuted Dawkins. This is how easy Dawkins is to refute. But also notice what Dawkins says. He says, we can't say anything of God, this being, this first mover, as listening to prayers, forgiving sins, and reading innermost thoughts. When did we say that was the point of the argument? Right? The point of the argument was to demonstrate that God exists, right? That a being which we know of as God, right? Like a nominal definition of God, and demonstrating that. Why is he saying, well, this doesn't mean that he listens to our prayers? We never stated that was the point of the argument, right? We know that from divine revelation. Are there any good arguments or good reads against the Kantian critiques of the 5 ways? You guys can probably hear my dog barking, but it's all right. Are there any good critiques of the Kantian critiques? Or any good reads? God, His Existence and His Nature by Gary Lagrange. He refutes Kant in that book, and refutes the arguments that Kant used, like the phenomena distinction. So I would definitely check that book out. Actually, I recommended that book on my 10 theology books to read. So yeah. Is it not possible for the Creator to bring forth things into existence, but the things themselves to spontaneously stay existent? No, because what we observe is that, for example, like the rock which is moved by, or actually that's not like a good example. I guess like, for example, a chandelier which is hanging by the ceiling, that is dependent on the ceiling, which is dependent on the house, which is dependent on the earth, so on and so forth. There's a chain of dependency, and at any moment of that chandelier being up on the ceiling, we can always ask, why does it continue to stay there, right? So in the same manner, we can always ask, why does this thing continue to exist? And that's necessarily because, well, God keeps it in existence at any moment. God is the, ultimate being, ipsum esse subsistence, the ultimate being which is existence itself, and he provides existence to all things in reality. So yeah, that's what I would say in regards to that. What else? So we've just gone over some of his critiques. I don't know if he has anything else. Let me see here. He also says, this is also a silly argument. This is how you know how silly this argument is. This is like a basic atheist argument. He says, this is what Dawkins says. He says, incidentally, it has not escaped the notice of logicians that omniscience and omnipotence are mutually incompatible. If God is omniscient, he must already know how he is going to intervene to change the course of history using his omnipotence. But that means he cannot change his mind about his intervention, which means he is not omnipotent. Karen Owens has captured this witty little paradox in the equally engaging verse. Can an omniscient God who knows the future find the omnipotence to change his future mind? So, this is the silliest argument ever. Why would you think God would change his mind? If God has a set plan, right, God is omniscient, he knows all things, he knows the best route and best plan to take, why would there be any need to change this divine plan that God has instilled? Right? God's not going to be like one day, like, oh, maybe I should have done this differently. Right? Like, this is just a complete lack of what we mean by omniscience and omnipotence. Right? So this critique is pointless, and it really has nothing to do with the argument at hand. It doesn't really refute the 5 ways, I guess. Or it's just really not tied to it. It's not specific to it. It's very like red herring like, in my opinion. But nonetheless. I don't know if there's anything else. To return to the infinite regress and the futility of invoking God to terminate it, it is more parsimonious to conjure up, say, a Big Bang singularity, or some other physical concept as yet unknown. Calling it God is at best unhelpful and at worst perniciously misleading. So Dawkins has no idea what we're talking about, because when we say that God is the cause of all creation, when we say in these arguments that God provides motion and therefore existence to all things in reality, from these arguments, we're not saying that God, in the beginning of time began creation. Now, we know that information from divine revelation, but we don't know that from natural theology. That's not the position we're arguing. All Thomas Aquinas is saying is that when it comes to creation, God keeps it in existence at any moment. And this being which keeps it in existence is what we know of as God. He's not saying that we can demonstrate that there's a being which started creation. And that's why when he invokes the Big Bang Theory, like as if we're talking about the beginning of creation. So he doesn't know the difference between a per se and per accidents causal chain. So, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. If God is perfect, why he not change his perfect plan? Exactly. If you guys have any questions, let me know. About anything. Either this, what we're talking about, or, off topic. Dawkins knows nothing about theology. That is true. Um, don't change what's not broken. Do you think it's a problem that many people ascribe human characteristics to God that lead to so many paradoxes? Well, I'd have to ask what like human characteristics you're talking about, because I don't think like we'd say humans have omnipotence, omniscience, etc., right? Uh, so we don't necessarily anthropomorphize God in his nature, right? Like we're gonna say that God possesses all perfections, that we have in a way more perfect manner, in an infinitely more perfect manner. So we're not gonna say that, God has, in a univocal sense, God has attributes that humans have. I'm looking at the viewers, and it's so weird. It goes from like 40 to 47 like instantly. I don't know if that's like just my system, but do you talk with your family and friends about theology? No, not really. I guess it depends. I mean, like definitely I'm not gonna bust down the argument for motion for them, Like I've never had the need to do that. Yeah, I think that'd be pretty wild. Do you know about the per accidents and per se distinction? Like I would never personally talk about this type of theology. Maybe the Bible. What is your best argument for the resurrection of Christ? Um, I personally go for more of like a. I'll give you a good book. So this is gonna be. Where is it actually? Oh, so this is like if you're just trying to get into this, The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Gary Habermas and Mike Licona. These scholars literally use these scholars use what the general consensus of scholars have to say. They use, I think, 5 facts. So what they do is they start from that and they build a case around what the general consensus of scholars have to say. Do the consensus of scholars say that the apostles were willing to suffer for their faith? Things such as that. So I tend to go down that route more. Now, if I was debating like a scholar, I'm obviously not going to use like every single, like you don't want to use a minimal facts argument when you're debating a scholar. You want to give them all the evidence, right? And that's why the maximal, as much evidence as you could give them would be like this book, The Resurrection of Jesus. So this is also by Mike Licona, same author. I think it's great. I mean, there's some great stuff in here. Critiques to Hume's epistemology on history. I mean, that's pretty good. So that's what I would say. Some type of minimal facts. It doesn't have to be a strict version. Yeah, no problem, Brandon. How would you defend Aristotelian metaphysics, because often atheists don't hold to these? So that is true. So you have to kind of start from the basics. Now, sometimes you don't have to go too far. So, for example, I've debated many atheists where they kind of just grant the metaphysics. In that they agree that that's kind of like how they view certain metaphysical features of reality. So, for example, like there's this, I debated this atheist, and it was more of a discussion than a debate. It wasn't like a formal debate. So I just had a discussion with them, and I was using the diente argument from Thomas Aquinas, which is basically Aquinas does the distinction between what a thing is, its essence, and its existence, the fact that it exists. And I was using this argument, and I said, would you say that there is a distinction between what a thing is and that it exists? And he granted that. Now, these are very vast metaphysical claims, but, it kind of does follow forth from what we observe and what we apprehend. Now, some atheists like, Graham Oppy are going to go deeper and say, actually, I'm not going to grant that. So you would have to get a little bit more into the metaphysics of the argument. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to start at epistemology. You have to start at the very basis. And for a good book, I guess I would recommend Philosophizing in Faith by Gary Lagrange. It wasn't actually written by him, but it's collected articles. And basically, he goes over epistemology. He covers, I think my camera was lagging, but basically he goes over epistemology. He refutes Descartes. He refutes David Hume. So yeah, I don't know why my camera's like lagging right now. I hope that's not how it looks on camera or on stream. But yeah. So that's how I would go about doing so. Someone made a joke earlier. Actually, that was pretty funny. Yeah, no, I don't. What someone? I can't find it now, but what's the book name? I think if you're referring to the one I was just talking about, it's Philosophizing in Faith by Gary Lagrange. As you can tell, I love Gary Lagrange. He's one of my favorite Thomists. He refuted Kant, Hume, Descartes. I mean, like, he refuted every single, idolized philosopher in the Renaissance and past. Is it the best route towards atheists to provide arguments for God's existence and then to try and argue for Christ's resurrection, or can you use Christ's resurrection to prove the former? That's a great question. So, of course, I can't give like a universal standard. I would say that before I actually got into epistemology and philosophy and metaphysics, I would say that all I utilized, and a lot for me, what my faith really was like, why I was Christian was the fact that was the resurrection, right? Paul says, I think it's like 1 Corinthians 15:14, which says like, if Christ has not been raised, then our faith is in vain. So proving the resurrection was very important to me. No, not proving it in like a metaphysical sense, but just like not demonstrating either, but giving a probabilistic argument, as we do any historical claim. And of course, you can never like demonstrate it, but you can't demonstrate any historical claim with absolute certainty. So, yeah. So I guess I would say, depending on the atheist. So if you can demonstrate God's existence, then things like the resurrection make more sense. Whereas some atheists actually might be convinced by the resurrection and become Christian. Some atheists might become Christian just by demonstrating God's existence and not even the resurrection. So it really depends on the Christian and such. So that's what I would say. Let me make myself a little bit bigger so you guys can see me more. All right. What else we got here? I think I'm gonna switch over to the video. We can kind of go over that. I don't know if it's gonna be good. I just want to critique Dawkins' arguments. They're gonna be very emotional, I'm assuming. Yeah, no problem. Brandon, you're asking great questions, brother. Regarding my previous question, many people think since we are made in his image, that since we change our minds, make mistakes, love unequally, and so on, he is likewise prone to actions, especially since there are occasions, even in the Bible, where it seems that way. So, where it says that God, changed his mind, God regretted that he had made mankind, for example, that's just anthropomorphical language. It's not literal, as a Thomist, what we do is we presuppose our metaphysics when we're reading scripture. Like, our metaphysics are in place, right? Reality as we see it, is based on these metaphysical principles, and so we must interpret scripture through that lens as well. And so this is going to be like anthropomorphical language. And even the people who wrote the very scriptures and the church fathers never thought that God literally changed his mind, you know? So, yeah. Guys, if you guys want to help support me, consider sending in a super chat. Also, if you guys want your question to be answered, because I'm going through a lot of questions right now. If you guys want that, you guys can do that. So thank you for any support. We got some people to support already. I think Pine Sap, or no, not Pine Sap. Kaysen supported. Yeah. And thank you guys for joining on this live stream. Don't let the evangelical see that pumpkin. Yeah. I was actually considering that. I thought there were gonna be some people like, is that Halloween decorations? Did you know that the Greek god or the Egyptian god Horus instantiated Halloween? God the Father regretted having created man because of the same violence we see today as in the days of Noah. Yeah, I think that's Genesis 7, chapter 7 or chapter 6. Epistemology, Aristotelian logic, theism, Christianity. Yeah, I would agree with that. Which basically, epistemology is just Aristotelian logic. They kind of go hand in hand, but yeah, exactly. Demonstrate Aristotelian logic or epistemology. Demonstrate theism. Demonstrate Christianity. It's like a standard. Atheist arguments are about feelings. You can't convince them by appealing to logic. Well, then they would just be fallacious in their reasoning, of course. I think, although I disagree with Descartes completely on his epistemology and everything, I would say that Descartes did say a good line when he said, basically, that all the objections against God are based on feeling, emotion. They have nothing to do with logic and facts. Very few atheists actually use reason. You know, Richard Dawkins is a good example. But we're gonna review his debate. How do I get into refuting LPTs? Refute their ability to presuppose such things such as God's existence by utilizing the peripatetic axiom, and just simply by understanding Aristotelian epistemology, you can basically refute the LPT, because they're completely on a different paradigm of, right? They're presuppositionalists, so they're completely on a different paradigm of how they would, come to God's existence, for example. So study Aristotelian or Thomistic epistemology. There's plenty of books that get into that. Philosophizing in Faith by Gergou-Lagrange literally will establish the peripatetic axiom. Thomistic Realism by Gilson also gets into that. It refutes Descartes. It establishes Thomistic epistemology. How are your debating skills? Is it something you have done before publicly? If not, would you like to in the future? I would like to do some more formal debates. Of course, like, I'm not like insanely knowledgeable on every single, topic, so it'd have to be more specific. I don't mind talking about certain topics that I'm not as knowledgeable in. But when it comes to, like, for example, like, I would not mind doing potentially a debate in the future. Of course, I'm in college now, so it's hard. I would have no time. But I wouldn't mind doing a debate on, like, was Jesus resurrected? Gospel authorship. I would also like consider doing one on the arguments from Aquinas, such as the Diente argument. I love that argument so much. Sanctus, what are your thoughts on using AI to index vast amounts of literature and using it for apologetics? Be careful with AI because, for example, there's this like Aquinas bot, and it just like spouts stuff that Aquinas would never say. And it often mixes up things, and so you have to be careful not to just take, word for word what certain AI say. It's kind of hard. AI is at this weird place where it's like not really that reliable, in my opinion. Like, it's good if you want to like, like ask it to give you, like give me a book to read on such and such an issue, and you might be able to get that. Magisterium AI only. Yeah. The Bible says what it means. It means what it says, which is the fallacy of Protestants. Who do you think has been doing the best work in regards to defending the Catholic faith against opponents of the faith? Currently, right now, I would say probably, I mean, that's your server? All right, bro. Oh, okay. So I'll answer this question. Then we got a $5. Don't know. So, what was the question? Who do you think? Probably Trent Horn. He has probably been the most influential. Jimmy Akin as well. They're very great, I guess, apologists in general. But it's very unfortunate that we don't have as much Thomas. Edward Fazer is good, but he's kind of like analytical. Wagner is great. Wagner is great. He's very knowledgeable on a lot of, fields in scholasticism, and even on like the magisterium. So yeah, definitely Wagner as well. How do you feel about Orthodox theology saying Thomism? And first of all, thank you, Giovanni, for the $5 donut. I really do appreciate that. He says, how do you feel about Orthodox theology saying Thomism fails in comparison to transcendental arguments? Are any good sources? Went down a J Dyer hole. All right. J Dyer, the man, the myth, the legend. So when it comes to this, and I kind of just talked about this, but basically when it comes to presuppositional apologetics, I would first say, you said Orthodox theology. So do keep in mind that most Orthodox do not use transcendental arguments. This is more with the like Dyerite tradition. It's crazy that that's actually a thing, but the Dyerite tradition in Orthodoxy, I guess, basically. I mean, there have been some other Orthodox, but like a lot of Protestants will utilize transcendental arguments. But basically, you just got to establish foundational epistemology. Do that by, for example, and I'll show the book again because it's good. Philosophizing in Faith by Gergo Lagrange. He refutes Kant, he refutes Hume, he refutes Descartes, and he establishes throughout the book Thomistic epistemology, how we come to knowledge. And so going about the route of, Thomistic epistemology and demonstrating that holding any other position is reductio ad absurdum, including presuppositional apologetics, right? I mean, the reasons we come to, for example, the law of non-contradiction is that we don't just presuppose it, right? We come to it by, us experiencing being, existence, right? So this is the peripatetic axiom. By us experiencing existence, we know that through our sense data, that sense data exists, right? Because we apprehend existence. We know that it exists. And it would be illogical to reject that because we're truly experiencing that. So knowledge starts with sense data. And basically, we apprehend these principles such as the law of non-contradiction, such as principle of identity, principle of sufficient reason, and such, from existence, from the metaphysical, aspect of being, the reality of being, existence, which sense data has and possesses. It possesses existence, because if it didn't, then we wouldn't have it in our sense data. And this is explained in much, much more detail by Gergo Lagrange when he refutes Descartes, when he refutes Hume and Kant. He also does so in God, His existence, and His nature. So I do have some videos on Thomistic epistemology. So on my Descartes video, I would recommend checking that one out to get like a basic understanding. And then I would go about maybe starting to get into, you don't have to read like all of it, but just go to like the articles in the chapters on epistemology that refute Hume, that refute Kant and Descartes. So that would be the best way. So like I was saying, we don't just presuppose these things, we come to knowledge of them by being, right? So yeah. Sanctus, you should become our popular Thomist. uh I would consider myself a Thomist, and I guess like a Thomist YouTuber. Because I would say I am a proponent of Thomism, strict observant Thomism specifically. But of course, I'm just getting started in my journey of studying Thomism. There's a lot of areas that I wouldn't necessarily venture into without like making a fool of myself. So I don't want to be known as the Thomist. Let's just say I'm an aspiring Thomist, I guess you could say. The internet orthodox fad is almost unbearable at times. Yeah, you know, I love the Orthodox liturgy, but we do find that Orthodox liturgy in Eastern Catholicism. So, yeah. But unfortunately, I feel like many of these like newer, younger Orthodox bros don't really take their own faith that serious. They see it more of like as like a masculinity thing than it being the truth. So, yeah, I'm sure a high percentage of internet little ortho bros do not attend church. Unfortunately, it definitely exists somewhat in Catholic circles as well, but I definitely feel like that happens a lot in Orthodox circles. But yeah, I think we can. You guys can ask any more questions, but I think we can switch over to. If I switch over, I think I'm gonna throw my headset on, cause that's the only way I can hear it. But yeah. You guys can ask any more questions. We're gonna switch over to the video. Man, we've been going for an hour. Eastern Catholicism bros mentioned, of course. I love my Eastern Catholic rites. I actually have a lot of Eastern Catholic icons in my room. Maybe I'll do like an icon reveal, my prayer reveal. All right, let me start the video. So I don't know how this is gonna go, but basically, I haven't watched this video, so I don't know how good this is gonna be. So we'll see. If this is dead, then I will obviously stop it. And we'll figure something else out. You guys can also recommend me some videos maybe to do reviews of. But we'll get into this a little bit. I think this will be interesting. This is definitely an older debate, but the arguments are like the atheist type arguments. So an hour, nothing. Oh, this is a legendary video? Yeah. I don't know. Do you guys think that we should watch Lennox's and what he has to say? Because it would be a lot longer, and I don't know if I just want to just like critique. I mean, Lennox could be wrong too. I mean, like, I don't agree with every single argument for God's existence. Like the teleological argument presented by not in the Thomistic tradition, but in like the more probabilistic one, I tend to stay away from. Brothers, I'm Lutheran. What's the main thing that makes Catholicism true and not Lutheranism? Theologically, the Pope. The Pope is what's gonna be the distinction, and we find that in the early church. the position of the Pope. We find it in Scripture. We find it in the early church. Irenaeus, says that we should follow Rome based on its preeminent authority. Of course, Irenaeus has apostolic origins in what he's saying, from Polycarp to John. All right, take care, Ronnie. Thanks for joining. God bless. All right, I'll start the video. Let me guys know your thoughts. I don't know how this is gonna be. So I know it opens up. Dawkins is gonna explain his life, but he starts to like his kind of like a autobiography kind of. So we'll start this video.
Word, I suppose, in the interest of Christian charity. Start discussion.
It takes 5 seconds to.
Okay, hold on. Let me mute this so you guys don't have to see a whole ad. All right, now we'll start this up. What is your best argument in favor of the act potency? Basically, just demonstrating that there's a plurality of being. So, for example, like this cup has the potential to be, placed down, for example, and my hand actualizes that potential. Now, we wouldn't say that the potential of this cup to change, or this potential of this cup to be actual, is something that doesn't exist completely, because if it didn't exist, then I couldn't conceive, for example, and this cup also could never actually, change, because it would have no ability to. So we would have to say that there's a lesser mode of being, in a sense, because potentials are not non-existence, but they're not existence in a full mode of existence like actuality is. So that's what I would say in regards to that. But anyway.
I was born in Africa. I'm a child of what was in those days the
If it's
British
too
Empire.
loud, let me know, guys.
Descended from a long line of khaki shorts-wearing, hairy-kneed, brown-shoed colonial officers. I had every opportunity to become a naturalist because Africa, as you know, is a wonderful place to be a naturalist. Unfortunately, that's not the way it was. I never was much of a naturalist, much to my father's disappointment, I suspect. He is a very good naturalist. I suppose that's a preamble to saying that my interest in the science of biology, which is what I specialize in, came more from an interest in fundamental questions than from a love of watching birds or insects or pressing flowers. I wanted to know why we're all...
Is there echo? I think I might know why. Oh, there shouldn't be echo. I don't know. Let me guys know if there's echo. Debunk Majesty of Reason. That will be a future video for sure. Okay. All right. There shouldn't be echo anymore.
All here.
Let me know if there still is.
What is the meaning of life? Why does the universe exist? Why does life exist? That's what drew me to science. My parents left Africa when I was about 8, and I came with them. I was sent to boarding school in England. I suppose part of the point of this autobiographical note is to give a kind of religious background, since we are talking about religion tonight. I had a harmless Anglican upbringing. I could never claim that I had religion thrust down my throat in the way it might have been had I been brought up in a more militant faith. Anglicanism, as you know, is a very civilized version of Christianity. No bells and smells, and no creationist lunacy. I was confirmed into the Church of England, and at the time I sincerely believed it. I had a brief period of doubt at the age of about 9, about 3 years before my confirmation. This doubt was caused by the realization and to have been born.
All right, so I'm actually going to skip some of this because this is just kind of him just like like, all right, we get it, you know? So I'm going to skip some of this and we'll move forward.
Into the Christian faith, and I recognized instantly that born into the Christian faith, and I recognized instantly
This is very
that
cool.
had I been born in, say, Afghanistan or born in India, I would have believed very different things. And that quite rightly shook my faith in the particular religion that I'd been brought up in. Weirdly, and I now don't understand why,
Notice the
I
fallacy.
seem to have lost those doubts when I was about 13.
Notice the fallacy
and I
he's
was
committing.
confirmed into the Church of England. I went to Oxford after having lost my faith for good at the age of...
So notice the fallacy he just committed. He just committed a logical fallacy. He just committed a genetic fallacy. Now, I don't know if he's gonna thinks that this is a valid argument, but he did lose his faith because of it, or it really pushed him down, in a sense. So basically, he's committing a genetic fallacy in the fact that he's saying, well, you know, I stopped believing in Christianity because, well, if I had been born in another area, you know, such as Afghanistan, I would have been Muslim. Well, that has no effect. That has no effect on the truth value of Christianity and the claims it makes. So just because you may have been born somewhere else and may have grown up in a different religion has no truth value on whether or not a religion is true. So we'll continue forth.
Of about 15 or 16, that was because I discovered Darwinism. I recognized that there was no good reason to believe in any kind of supernatural creator. And my final vestige, last vestige of religious faith disappeared when I finally understood the Darwinian explanation for life. I went to Oxford, I got a doctorate.
So evolution is true, Christianity is false. Okay, buddy. Okay, my dog's barking, so let me mute real quick. But notice that evolution was his biggest issue, when literally the Catholic Church has no issue, you know, with certain forms of evolution, right? So evolution being true, it's a non sequitur that Christianity is false, right? That's like, if you hold to a weird view of saying, you know, that God literally created Earth and all creation in 6,000 years, whatever short amount of time, then of course, yeah, you know, that form of Christianity is going to be false. But other forms of Christianity, such as in the Catholic Church, are going to be still true, technically speaking. It has no truth value on that or effect on that.
Doctorate at Oxford eventually. I went to the University of California at Berkeley as a very young assistant professor, teaching in those days animal behavior. I then went back to Oxford after about 2 years at Berkeley and continued my career as a student of animal behavior. About 1972, there was a general strike in Britain and there was no electric power. I couldn't do my research, and so I thought I would write a book. And I started to write a book which eventually became my first book, The Selfish Gene. However, unfortunately, the electric power came on again, and so I shelved the first 2 chapters of the book that I'd already written, put them in a drawer and forgot about them, until about 3 years later in 1975, when I got a sabbatical leave and resumed writing The Selfish Gene. Since then, I've written about 8 more books: Extended Phenotype, The Blind Watchmaker, River Out of Eden, Climbing Mount Improbable, Unweaving the Rainbow, A Devil's Chaplain, The Ancestor's Tale, and most recently, The God Delusion, which is the subject of tonight's debate. I regard it as an enormous privilege to be alive, and I regard it as a privilege to be alive, especially at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century. A privilege to be a scientist, and therefore to be in a position to understand something of the mystery of existence, why we exist. I think that religious explanations, although they may have been satisfying for many centuries, are now superseded and outdated. I think, moreover, that they're petty and parochial, and that the understanding that we can get from science of all those deep questions that religion...
Where's the argument? Mr. Dawkins, where's the argument? I think they're petty, and I think they're ferociously mean. And was Dawkins, was that an argument? No. That's literally all rhetoric and emotion appeals. Zero rhetoric in that whole exchange.
Once aspired to explain are now better, more grandly, in a more beautiful and elegant fashion explained by science.
Okay. It's about to be an ad. Mr. Dawkins, where was the argument? Okay.
Dr.
Now, I think he was just giving like an autobiography, so I'm not going to let that. But he did kind of make an argument. He's like, oh, you know, science just makes more sense. All right, Mr. Dawkins, but that wasn't really an argument. This is why new atheism failed, exactly. So we're going to continue for it. This is low-key fun. This is low-key fun, so let's continue for it.
Lennox?
Well, ladies and gentlemen...
All right, I don't know if I will go through all of Lennox's argument, because I do want to focus on Dawkins more so, but we're going to see.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. Each one of us has a biography and a worldview, our set of answers to the big questions that life throws at us. And so a little about my biography. I'm married to Sally. We have 3 children and 4 grandchildren.
I'm going to skip this.
My parents were Christian, but they were not sectarian. And the Christianity actually inquisitive, because
this is just kind of him talking about himself, so I'll skip this part.
They were like that themselves.
I'll save you guys time of your life.
Not in spite of their Christian faith, but because of it. And I owe them an immense debt for setting me free to read everything from Marx and Russell to C.S. Lewis, and developed in those days an interest in the big questions of life. I was very fortunate to get the chance to leave Ireland and go to Cambridge, where I could indulge my passion for mathematics. But it gave me my Humboldt Fellow to study in Germany and reason about these things, and to see at first hand the effect of systematic exposure to atheist indoctrination over the preceding 70 years. And so I too am very privileged to live at this time and to be involved in the public discussion of these issues. Now, reading Richard's book, I found absolutely fascinating, because it strikes me as an impassioned crusade to warn his fellow human beings of the slavery, the oppression, and the mental and possibly physical tortures imposed on them by religion.
I think he's Anglican, but
and I actually feel a lot of sympathy for you on this particular point, because I myself am totally opposed to any religion that seeks to impose itself by force, or that takes advantage of or abuses people in any way. You cannot impose truth by force. And both of us, I think, hold that religion should be debated in a rational way as anything else. I share his passion for truth. Neither of us, mercifully, is a postmodern relativist. But as a passionate atheist, Richard is committed to the idea that God is a delusion. For him, ultimate reality, I take it, consists of the impersonal matter and energy of the universe. I believe the exact opposite. God, far from being a delusion, is real. Ultimate reality is a
He's evangelical? Oh, that's unfortunate.
Personal, eternal, and supernatural God, who has revealed himself in the universe, in his word, the Bible, and supremely in Jesus Christ, his Son, who is Lord and God incarnate. Now, I'm very aware that this puts me, according to Richard's book, firmly in the category of those who sit fluttering among the dovecotes of the deluded, sucking my religious dummy, or pacifier, as you call it in Alabama. You suggest that religion builds a firewall in the mind against scientific truth. Well, that might be tragically the case with some religions, but it's not so with biblical Christianity. Indeed, the reason, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm passionate about truth is that God is the God of all truth. One of the most famous statements that Jesus ever made was, "I am the truth." An astonishing assertion that, as C.S. Lewis pointed out long ago.
All right, this is not really an argument, so I don't know if I should skip this part, but I'll keep it going for a little bit longer. I hope he doesn't go on that long on this part.
Is either megalomaniac, pathologically mistaken, or valid, since he is claiming not merely to say true things, although that is so, but claiming to be ultimate truth itself, the ultimate truth behind everything from the Andromeda Nebula to human life, conscience, and mind. Please note that what divides us is not science. We're both committed to it. What divides us is our worldviews, his atheistic.
Exactly. Science has nothing to do with it. Science has literally nothing to do with the truth value of Christianity. I mean, you might refute some evangelical circles, but literally listen how Lennox is like, yeah, you may posit all this science, but you're refuting such a small minority. I don't want to say small minority, but definitely a minority of Christians who hold to such a literal interpretation of Scripture and who reject science, right? The majority of Christians in this world are Catholic, and the Catholic Church has no issue with science. In fact, it pushes, the fruit of science, because science does have fruit, right? It's a form of knowledge. So it's unfortunate. Glad to see you're doing more streams. Thank you, brother. Thanks for coming in.
Mind theistic and Christian. Now, his book presents to us a grim world. It is a no-holds-barred attempt to deliver people from the dragon of religion so that they can lead a life of uninhibited self-fulfillment, unencumbered with the background threat of an imaginary God. And he says it looks bleak and cold, especially from the security blanket of religious ignorance. But, ladies and gentlemen, we need to take it seriously. If that's the way it is, then that's the way it is, and we need to face it. But we need to discuss it seriously and look at the evidence. Neither of us wishes to base his life on a delusion. But which is the delusion? Atheism or Christianity? That is for each of us to decide on the basis of the evidence, of course.
Picture this. You're sitting at home alone watching YouTube videos.
Okay. We can we need to get some better.
Thank you. The first
I might have to get YouTube
pieces
Plus or something.
Professor Dawkins' book, and
Red.
each of these that's reflected in your program is a summary. It's not a direct quotation, but the summary is, faith is blind, science is evidence-based. I have one excerpt at the top of page.
Yeah, this is like, you're gonna refute basic, very, very basic forms of Christianity that hold to like blind faith, like those who are like, yeah, like screw any form of evidence. But I mean, any like rational Christian has some reason to believe, right? And even if there are Christians who have more of a blind faith, that has no truth value on the truthness of Christianity, right? So we'll just continue forth as my dog barks.
126, to illustrate your argument, Professor Dawkins. One of the truly bad effects of religion is that it teaches us that it is a virtue to be satisfied with not understanding. Could you please elaborate?
Science uses evidence to discover the truth about the universe. It's been getting better at it over the centuries.
Okay, I just want to comment on that real quickly. So actually, let me go back to get the full blunt of this. So he basically said, or actually, no, I know, I understand the argument. Basically, Dawkins' issue with faith is that you don't necessarily need any evidence. You can kind of faith is okay with not having evidence. My issue with that claim is that is not what we mean. We think that we can come to various conclusions such that God exists, such that we can know certain metaphysical truths. We can know various aspects about the nature of God. But there are certain truths that are mysteries, such as the Trinity. Now, we believe we can to some extent, I'll say this much. We can say that we cannot know the Trinity by natural reason, by natural theology. We cannot come to the conclusion that God is necessarily a Trinity in that sense. But what we can say is that we know the Trinity from divine revelation. So there are certain parts in which we're going to say it is beyond knowledge. But notice, though, Dawkins is committing the same fallacy or the same illogical thinking, because he is probably going to be in more of the, I just hit my mic, he is probably going to be in more of the empiricist camp. So Dawkins can't know various truths about, for example, the various modes and dimensions of reality, right? That is just impossible for us to perceive and understand. Yet Dawkins is going to say that that his issue with faith is that we can't necessarily know all things, and that it's a belief which limits human knowledge. But what we're going to say is we are going to know as much as reason prevails us. And there are certain truths which we just can't know, but we can know very important truths, such as, that we exist, that God exists, and very important truths that have to do with our salvation. And it's just going to come to the limits of our ability to come to certain knowledge claims that we're just lacking in because we're finite creatures, right? So it's just the mode and manner of how we are as finite creatures currently that is going to be lacking, right? Like we can't, for example, apprehend God's essence, right? As material finite beings. It's just the limitation of our nature. So let's see what he has to say.
It's been getting better at it over the centuries in the teeth of opposition from religion, although it has to be admitted that, of course, science grew out of a religious tradition. Religion, as the quotation that Judge Pryor read out, teaches us to be satisfied with, was it lack of evidence or lack of...
with not understanding.
With not understanding. I think that when you consider the beauty of the world and you wonder how it came to be what it is, you are naturally overwhelmed with a feeling of awe, a feeling of admiration, and you almost feel a desire to worship something. I feel this. I recognize that other scientists, such as Carl Sagan, feel this. Einstein felt it. We, all of us, share a kind of religious reverence for the beauties of the universe, for the complexity of life, for the sheer magnitude of the cosmos, the sheer magnitude of geological time. And it's tempting to translate that feeling of awe and worship in...
So what does this have to do with the original proposition that he put forward, that faith blinds us? Like, what is the fact that you have a weird feeling or sensation to worship nature have to do with, faith being blind? Like, wouldn't that necessarily not limit you? I mean, if you're gonna say like, oh, as a scientist, I have this feeling to kind of like worship nature, to worship the awe-inspiring like creation, this world that we're in. I mean, like, wouldn't that actually expand you forward in your thinking? Because you're trying to equate that with like blind faith, which most Christians do not believe in. Minute circles. So I don't know. I don't know the relevancy of this point, but
into a desire to worship some.
If you guys have any questions as well, I can pause the video and answer it. So not necessarily nature itself. Yeah, to worship something. Yeah, of course. Like, he described it as kind of like worship something because it's so awe-inspiring. Yeah. It's just, how does that limit you though? Doesn't that want you to try and reach out for more? But I don't know. Maybe Dawkins will retract this point or comment further on it. We'll see.
Particular thing, a person, an agent, you want to attribute it to a maker, to a creator. What science has now achieved is an emancipation from that impulse to attribute these things to a creator. And it's a major emancipation because humans have an almost overwhelming desire to think that they've explained something by...
That's crazy, because why is it that some of the greatest scientists have been Christian thinkers, right? Why is it that one of the earliest formulations of the Big Bang Theory was by a Catholic priest? I mean, seriously, I mean, some of the greatest physicists have been Catholics, right? So I don't know how this relates to the truth value of Christianity at all. It just seems like an irrelevant
attributing
point.
it to a maker. We're so used to explaining things in our own world, like these television cameras, like the lights, like everything that we make, the clothes we wear, the chairs we sit on, everything we see around us is a manufactured object. And so it's so tempting to believe that has been made, that living things, or that the stars or mountains,
Yeah, and I would want to critique Dawkins further and say that many of the modern scientists that we find out here are actually divorcing philosophy from science. Some of these modern scientists out here are actually saying that we don't need philosophy anymore. Science is the ultimate, system of truth. But you are left without any foundation. Philosophy is the very foundation of science, right? I mean, seriously, if you hold to like Hume's conception of causality, if you throw away consistency in nature, right? If you don't think that there's consistency in nature, you are making philosophical, metaphysical claims, right? So it's just a silly point. And this is, he wants to say that science is somehow more free, but in all seriousness, I think that science has lost its foundation by throwing out religion, which is intertwined with natural theology.
Or rivers have all been made by something. It was a supreme achievement of the human intellect to realize that there is a better explanation for these things, that these things can come about by purely natural causes. When science began,
Yet again, even if I grant, right, if I grant that evolution is brought about, right, like I'm willing to accept some forms of evolution, but even if I grant the evolution proposed by Dawkins, does he think that that necessarily means that God does not exist? I don't know. It seems like a silly non sequitur that he's committing here.
the aim to achieve it was there, but we didn't know enough. Nowadays, at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, we still don't know everything, but we've achieved an enormous amount in the way of understanding. We now understand essentially how life came into being. We know that we are all cousins of all animals and plants. We know that we're descended from a common ancestor.
Also, like Isaac Newton, who is also he's religious. He's not Christian in a broad sense, but he is religious. He himself was an Aristotelian and had natural theology intertwined with his science, right? Do modern science, do they have these consistent metaphysical, structures? They don't. So it's less free than it was before.
Ancestor, which might have been something like bacteria. We know the process by which that came about. We don't know the details, but we understand essentially how it came about. There are still gaps in our understanding. We don't understand how the cosmos came into existence in the first place, but we're working on that. The scientific enterprise is an active
We're working on it. We're working on it, guys. We'll find out one day. But we're working on it. It's in the works currently. One day it will be. We have a team working on it right now. We're gonna figure it out. Don't worry.
Seeking, an active seeking out of gaps in our knowledge, seeking out of ignorance, so that we can work to plug that ignorance. But religion teaches us to be satisfied with not really understanding. Every one of these difficult questions that comes up.
Whose religion? Whose religion are you critiquing? I mean, seriously. I mean, like, are you talking about the blind faith religion? Are you talking about the Catholic religion, which has reason, right? What you find when you read church documents, right? When you read encyclicals, and they talk about natural theology, is they say, we don't divorce faith from reason, right? It's a great travesty to divorce faith from reason. And so, if he's talking about these evangelical circles, these very unintellectual groups, of course you're going to find fault with that. Of course you're going to have that issue. But when you're in this intellectual and very, rational form of Christianity, which is Catholicism, which is natural theology, I mean, this is not an issue at all.
Science says, right, let's roll up our sleeves and work on it. Religion says, oh, God did it.
What religion, Mr. Dawkins? I mean, even Lennox does not believe in this. We don't believe in God of the gaps. So this point is minute, It's like I'm going to critique religion and only critique a minute category of that religion. So I don't know. This point is really, it doesn't follow. It's very non sequitur-y. That's a word. I don't know.
We don't need to work on it. God did it. It's as simple as that. We have no...
Who says that?
thrusting force pushing us on to try to understand. Religion stultifies the impulse to understand because religion provides a facile, easy, apparent explanation, although as we'll see later in the evening, it isn't really an explanation, and it prevents the further work on the problem.
Thank you. Dr. Lennox?
Where was the argument? Where was the argument in that whole... that's great rhetoric, but yet again, it's like... What you notice with Dawkins, unfortunately, is he utilizes a lot of rhetoric, but truly misses out on the crux, the very crux of what he could be attacking. I mean, he could literally... This is why I think, the route he's taking through evolution is not the route you go about to disprove all religion. Because not only is he trying to disprove Christianity, he's making claims about religion in general. He's making universal claims, as if all Christians believe in blind faith and separate faith from reason. We don't do that in the Catholic world. In fact, we're known for not doing that in the Catholic world. So this whole point is just, it's redundant, in my opinion.
Thanks.
Probably the most common question that I'm asked as a professor at Hillsdale is, what happened to my country?
There are two issues here. Faith is blind, science is evidence-based. I do not agree with the first one, but I very much agree with the second one. Some faith is blind. And blind faith can be very dangerous, especially if it's coupled with a blind obedience to an evil authority.
True.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to emphasize, is true whether the blind faith is that of religious or secular people. But not all faith is blind faith, because faith itself carries with it the ideas of belief, trust, commitment, and is therefore only as robust as the evidence for it. Faith in the flying spaghetti monster, much beloved of Richard Dawkins, a delightful idea, is blind because there's no evidence for the flying spaghetti monster. But faith in relativity theory is not blind because there is evidence supporting it. I can't speak authoritatively for other religions, but faith in the Christian sense is not blind. And indeed, I do not know a...
Lennox is actually cooking. Lennox is actually cooking. This is exactly what I was talking about. I mean, like, whose religion are you talking about? Seriously, I mean, even in Islamic circles, they don't believe faith is like blind. I mean, maybe some schools of Islam might have a belief closer to that, but, you know, we still have in Catholic, Islamic, in Protestant circles that there's a sense in which we don't divorce faith from reason, especially in the Catholic faith. We are very clear that faith cannot be divorced from reason. You know? If not for Aquinas and his ilk, there would be no intellectual tradition or no universities. Dawkins wouldn't have a thing to say. If for not the intellectual tradition he vilifies. Yeah. And even further back, I mean, go back past Aquinas and the intellectual universities that existed and the intellectual schools that existed. Maybe not as grand during the time of Aquinas, but very much so. I mean, if you read, for example, Pascendi by St. Pius X, he says, you know, it's a great travesty. This is not quote, you know, word for word, but he basically says it's a great travesty to leave Aquinas and like natural theology out of schools and to divorce basically natural theology from general knowledge, for it truly is the basis of knowledge in general, how we know anything at all, right? I mean, we must have professors be teaching Aquinas. Is there any serious group that actually divorced faith from reason? The only thing I could think of is like certain like evangelical circles. Now, what's unfortunate is they tend to have the largest voice in the picture a lot of the time, I feel like. And I think that's why people think of, when they think of Christianity, like some atheists, they'll think of Christianity and be like, oh, you know, all Christians believe in this blind faith. But it's just like a misnomer of what the true intellectual tradition is. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, you can guys ask away in chat. We'll get chat active. Make sure you guys like the video as well so we get some more people in here. And if you guys want to support, consider doing a super chat. I would really appreciate that. But I also appreciate you guys being here nonetheless. So let's continue forth.
Serious Christian who thinks it is. Indeed, as I read it, blind faith in idols and figments of the human imagination, in other words, delusional gods, is roundly condemned in the Bible. My faith in God and Christ as the Son of God is no delusion. It is rational and evidence-based. Part of the evidence is objective. Some of it comes from science, some comes from history, and some is subjective, coming from experience. Now, of course, we do not speak of proof. You only get proof in the strict sense in my own field of mathematics. But in every other field, including science, we can't speak of proof. We can speak of evidence, of pointers, of being convinced beyond reasonable doubt. I think it's important in this context to emphasize that science is limited, because there seems to me a creeping danger of equating science with rationality. But what is beyond science is not necessarily irrational. Science cannot tell us, for instance, whether a poem, a work of literature, or a work of art or music is good or beautiful. Science can tell us that if you put strychnine into your grandmother's tea, it will kill her. But science cannot...
Well, I would actually emphasize even further than that. In some particular views of science, especially like in the empiricist camp, they actually would say, no, science can't tell us if putting poison in, tea is actually could kill someone. They'd actually say that causality is not always universal, right? Hume and those who are empiricists, which a lot of scientists tend to be in a similar tradition, are actually not going to hold to universal truths, universals, right? Everything is particular, right? Nominalists, right? And so they're actually going to say, no, it's possible that, putting such tea or such poison in tea is actually not always going to do such a thing, even though that's so contrary to our sense experience. But nonetheless.
Tell you whether it's morally right to do so. And the Nobel Prize winner, Sir Peter Medawar, who's quite a hero, I think, for both of us, has pointed out that you can easily see the limits of science because it cannot answer the elementary questions of a child. Who am I? What is the purpose of my existence? Where am I going?
That is true. And I would actually expand on it in a different manner. For example, identity. Can science tell you even metaphysically what you are? I mean, does science even do so? Can science know such a thing? Especially when so many scientists now are nominalists and don't actually hold to universal truths. They can't, obviously.
Now, Richard has just contrasted science and religion being content with not understanding, whereas science is unraveling the understanding of the universe. And I understand and feel the force of that objection very strongly, because sometimes Christians, I admit, have been guilty of a lazy God of the gaps kind of solution. I can't understand it, therefore God did it. And of course, God disappears as the gaps close. But I'd like to point out that there are two kinds of gap, ladies and gentlemen. There are gaps that science closes, and I call those the bad gaps. But there are also gaps that science opens, and we may come to some of those later. But as for the idea itself, Richard referred to the very important fact that science, modern science as we know it, exploded in the 16th and 17th centuries, and it arose out of a theistic background. And many philosophers of science have studied this and come to the conclusion that's now called Whitehead's thesis, that human beings became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. I think that is profoundly important, because it means, far from religion hindering science, it was the driving force behind the rise of science in the first place. And when Isaac Newton, for example, discovered his law of gravity and wrote down the equations of motion, he didn't say, marvelous, I now understand it, I've got a mechanism, therefore I don't need God. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was because he understood the complexity and sophistication of the mathematical description of the universe that his praise for God was increased. And I would like to suggest, Richard, that somewhere down in this you're making a category mistake because you're confusing mechanism with agency. We have a mechanism, it does X, Y, and Z, therefore there's no need for an agent. I would suggest...
And I would want to go even further. Can science explain the laws of logic? Right? In fact, many circles in science who hold philosophical views such as nominalism don't even have a universal idea of logic because they don't believe in universals. You know how many people I've debated who are atheists, right? Who don't use universal principles of logic, who don't use the law of non-contradiction as a universal principle. I mean, that's very... You trap yourself if you deny even... I think this is what Zigliaro said, the Thomist. He said something to the like of, you know, even if you doubt the law of non-contradiction for even a moment, you've wrapped yourself into, you know, you've thrown yourself in a hole that you can't get out of. Your argument becomes incomplete, invalid, right? But this is what many of the nominalist camp will do, who don't hold to universal truths. Of course, many being modern scientists who don't believe in universals.
That the sophistication of the mechanism, and science rejoices in finding such mechanisms, is evidence for the sheer wonder of the creative genius of God.
Being able to have something to always protect myself.
Our next thesis is that science supports atheism, not Christianity.
We're definitely not going to go through the whole video. Yeah, exactly. The laws of logic are the highest presuppositions that intellectual creatures have. Try to deny it, you have to end up in a pit. Yeah, I would agree to that, to the sense of which you put it, 100%. All right, so we're not going to go through the whole entirety of this video, but I'll try to do as much. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. So we can keep this, you know, chat active. But yeah, if you guys have any questions throughout the video, if you guys even have off-topic questions, feel free to ask. This is like the open Q&A reviewed period.
And on this thesis, Professor Dawkins, I would like to read two excerpts from your book. The first is on page 67. You are quoting your colleague, the Chicago geneticist Jerry Coyne.
Am I getting a beard?
With approval. And
soon.
he writes, to scientists like Dawkins and E.O. Wilson, the celebrated Harvard biologist, the real war is between rationalism and superstition. Science is but one form of rationalism, while religion is the most common form of superstition. Several pages earlier, on page 59, you write,
What's the book of the writings of the Church Fathers? You have to specify what you mean there. What's the book of the writings? I don't know if you're asking which one of these books or what it is in general, what the book is. These are all the Church Fathers, or not all of them. This is like only a snippet, really, actually. But these are like a good amount of the Church Fathers. Augustine, Chrysostom, Apostolic Fathers, Tertullian. Always stay shaven like a true Latin. That's fair. That is a fair. Although, as far as I'm concerned, Marcus Aurelius had a nice little beard. So, I don't know. The best to get, the best. Start off with the Apostolic Fathers. A good translation to read, if I can find it. See, I'm like losing stuff. Oh, they're right here, actually. The Apostolic Fathers. This is one translation of it. It's by Rick Brannon. This is the one I read, and it was very clear. It's very modern. I think Bart Ehrman has one as well, but this is even newer than Bart Ehrman's translation. And just because it's written by Bart Ehrman doesn't mean it's a bad thing, by the way. Just because he's an atheist. It's still a good translation, I guess. What would you recommend me read on an extensive, rigorous argument for Catholicism which doesn't strawman the opposition? What would you recommend me read for a rigorous argument for Catholicism which doesn't strawman the opposition? Also, books on Thomism for fairly low level. I've got Phaser's Five Proofs. So, in terms of Catholicism, rigorous ones, I mean, it's not like rigorous, but I think Pope Peter by, is it Joe Heschmeyer? Yeah, Joe Heschmeyer. It's a decent, book to get into the papacy, and it really doesn't strawman the obscurity of Scripture also, because it sounds like you're trying to refute Protestants more. So the obscurity of Scripture, actually, I would have to stand up and grab it, but I guess I can. Yeah, whatever. So the obscurity of Scripture, this is a good book as well. This would basically establish sola scriptura to be minute. I think that is kayak. Can you congratulate? Congratulations, brother. Congratulations. Make sure it's a holy relationship. But thank you for the $2 donation. I appreciate that. But congratulations on your relationship. I pray it goes well. I pray it goes well. In terms of low-level books on first streamer to do it, W. You got to get Wagner to do it next. In terms of Thomism, I guess I would recommend Phaser's Beginner's Guide to Aquinas. And what's another book on Thomism? Reverend Coppin's 100%. This is very good. A Brief Text of Logic and Mental Philosophy by Reverend Coppins. Anyway. Yeah, that's what I would recommend. Hope that helped. Rationalism weird. It varies between people. As if it's spirit speaking. And given we know 90% of what we say after. Is Kayak gonna clip me now? Okay. Let's continue forth.
Noma, which is the idea that religion and science do not overlap, non-overlapping magisteria, is popular only because there is no evidence to favor.
Who are the most intelligent thinkers you've ever read? Garrigou-Lagrange, St. Thomas Aquinas, John of St. Thomas, just like all the Thomists. I mean, seriously, the Thomists were probably some of the greatest thinkers ever. I mean, generally, anyone in the Thomistic camp is very, very intelligent. Many of them are like polymaths. They know everything when it comes to like if you read Garrigou-Lagrange, he talks about like physics. He'll randomly mention like physics and get into like a little deep analysis of it, and it's like, all right. Yeah, J. Dyer for sure. But yeah.
Favor the God hypothesis. Would you care to elaborate?
Yes. First, I'd like to respond a little bit to what John said on the previous occasion. feel happier if we could have a bit more of a dialogue rather than this. When you say faith is rational and evidence-based, I mean, if that were true, it wouldn't need to be faith, would it? I mean, if there were evidence for it, why would you need to call it faith? You'd say just evidence. And when you said that faith in relativity, in Einstein's theory of relativity, is evidence-based, that of course it is. But the evidence is all important. I mean, Einstein's predictions fit in with observed fact and with a whole body of theory, whereas we only need to use the word faith.
Notice here's the issue in his thinking. It fits in with observed fact. Notice how Dawkins limits knowledge to observed fact, right? Notice the issue with that. I mean, do you observe the law of non-contradiction itself? Right? Like, to think that knowledge is limited to what we observe? I mean, there's so many metaphysical truths that must necessarily be the case. Causality. Do you observe causality? Or is that a metaphysical truth that you agree with? Right? So, we got to be very careful not to base all knowledge on just observable fact, right? We can, as Thomas, we can abstract metaphysical principles, in a sense, from sense data, from the senses. Yeah. There you go. Radical again, as usual. Yeah. Rhetorical. For sure.
When there isn't any evidence.
No, not at all. I presume you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that? On
Yes,
which you
plenty.
base it? Yes.
Plenty of evidence. I
need to find the best
gosh,
way to learn
these-
math and science.
These ads, man. I'm actually going to have to get like an ad blocker.
Let's generalize it. Never mind about my wife. Let's generalize.
It's the same with mine, Richard. It's the same with mine.
Let's say that in general, how do we know that somebody loves us? Okay.
Yes.
You can use a word faith for that if you like, but it's not the right use of the word. Because,
Oh, it is.
Because you know why, you know your wife loves you because of all sorts of little signs, little catches in the voice, little looks in the eye. That's the evidence that it.
Yes,
That's
that's
evidence.
right.
That's perfectly good evidence. That's not
Looks in the
faith.
eye.
Yes, it is.
Well, okay, then we're coming down to pure semantics.
I think you've been influenced too much by Kant, you see.
Not explicitly, I have to say.
He just admitted that there are different variations of faith, that all faith is not blind faith. This is the internet meme.
Okay, let's go on. Which of these statements are we now on?
We're on the second.
For an opening.
It didn't seem to have much connection with the quotes from the God delusion that you
That
read.
actually works well with the first.
Okay, it does. You read a quote from Jerry Coyne about the real war being between supernaturalism and naturalism. The context of that quote was the turf wars, in a sense, in American education between creationism and evolution. And within that context, I have been accused of letting the side down because, as you know, there's a problem with American education that some nutcases are trying to introduce creationism into American schools, which is obviously very bad for science, and my scientific colleagues are deeply worried by this and are trying to fight it, and all power to them. They complain that I am not helping matters, that I'm in a sense rocking the boat by saying quite openly that it is my understanding of evolution that has led me to atheism. And they point out again quite rightly that if I were called up to in a court of law testifying in favor of evolution and against the teaching of creationism, and the lawyer said, Mr. Dawkins, is it true that evolution has led you to atheism? I should have to say yes, whereupon he would turn to the jury and say, my case rests. it doesn't do the cause of science any good to...
Notice how he makes the equivocation to saying all Christians, as if... Notice what he said. Why he doesn't believe in Christianity? Because of evolution. Well, Mr. Dawkins, does every branch of Christianity reject evolution completely? Right? He's making these universal statements.
Unite evolution with atheism. That was the context of Jerry Coyne's remark. Coyne was saying, okay, if you're concerned only with the narrow political battle of saving American science in the schools, then you should button your lip and stop talking about atheism. If, on the other hand, you think, as Coyne does, that the real war is between supernaturalism and naturalism, then you would say, well, the battle over evolution and creationism is only a skirmish. The real war is over something rather more profound. That was the context of that. Noma was the second quotation that you read. That's non-overlapping magisteria. The late Stephen Gould argued...
Bad argument from Sanctus. All right.
That there was no real battle between science and religion because they were about non-overlapping magisteria, different things.
That's why I specified evolution implicitly rejects theism. That's why I specifically specified Darwinian evolution, right? So I'm not saying that evolution in totality is wrong. So I would reject, forms of Darwinian evolution in a sense, Darwinian, in the sense that lower order can somehow produce higher order things, higher order intelligences in life, which Gergoud-Lagrange actually critiques.
Ships that pass in the night, no contact between them. They're about totally different things. I don't think that for a moment. I think that religion really is, in a sense, about science. I think that religious claims about the universe are scientific claims. I suspect that John may agree with me about this. Claims about the universe are scientific claims. A universe with a God would be a very different kind of universe from a universe without a God.
How does he know that? What is the demonstration of that argument? Is he going to say chaos necessarily precludes God's existence? Why is there chaos if there's a good God? Right? Why does bad happen if God exists, right? If God good, why bad? This kind of seems like a more of emotional, well, I don't think, in my own subjective standpoint, I don't think that God would do and make creation have chaos because, well, that's what I think God would do. And I know what God would do. This is prideful argumentation.
Scientific methods are the appropriate methods, or at least the scientific way of thinking is an appropriate way of thinking for deciding whether we live in this kind of universe with a God or that kind of universe without a God. It becomes even more glaring. Notice
how this is mostly just rhetoric and zero argumentation and just emotional argumentation. I think God would do something differently. If chaos exists, I think God wouldn't allow chaos in the universe. This is an emotional argument. This has no basis. He's such on observable facts, right? And yet, is that an observable fact? How do you know that's what God would specifically want? You're making first of all metaphysical claims, so non-observational claims. Even though he's putting forth specifically and basing his argument on observation alone.
Where you talk about miracles, which, however much sophisticated theologians may profess their non-belief in miracles, the plain fact is that the ordinary person in the pew, the ordinary unsophisticated churchgoer, believes deeply in miracles and And it's largely miracles that persuade that person into the church in the first place. If there are miracles, they are to be judged as by scientific means. If there was a virgin birth, if somebody was raised from the dead, these are strictly scientific claims. They may be difficult to verify, but as I've said in the book, The God Delusion, if you could imagine, hypothetically, that DNA evidence could be discovered showing that Jesus never had a father, that Jesus was born of a virgin, then can you imagine any theologian saying, oh, no, not relevant, separate magisteria, science has no bearing on this case? Of course they wouldn't. Science has every bearing on this case.
It's odd to me that Dawkins thinks that science can make theological claims, that somehow Jesus' resurrection from the dead is a even though Jesus' resurrection from the dead is a theological belief, Dawkins somehow thinks that we can utilize science actually to answer this question for us. So it's very interesting how universal Dawkins thinks science is. It's a bit odd, in fact. I mean, science is a tool, but it's not the only tool, right? Like, there's still metaphysics and philosophy, which is another tool for knowledge. So this is kind of like an odd argument for Dawkins to make. And it's kind of reductio ad absurdum. It's self-refuting to think that science is kind of universal in its nature and that it can make theological claims.
That's what I have to say about Noma, and I think I probably run out of my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Dawkins.
Well, I agree with you very much on the Noma issue, Richard, that science and religion, keeping them separate. Actually, if you read this book...
There were witnesses, so it's not just theological, to be honest. Well, when I specify theological in that, of course, like, there is historical evidence that the apostles witnessed the resurrection of Jesus, but of course it is inevitably theological, right, that God raised him from the dead. But nonetheless, I would agree, yes. But is that really in the domain of science, or is that historical inquiry, right?
Small print on Noma, it rather disconcerts you because it says that science deals with reality and religion with everything else. And of course, I'm not very happy with that. I certainly agree with you that the modes of logical analysis that science has introduced to you are the right ones to deal with many of the central claims of Christianity. I would widen it a bit. It's historical science, of course. We're dealing with events in the past. But Christianity is falsifiable in that technical sense. I would very much support that. Now, the thesis here is that science supports atheism, not Christianity. I think atheism undermines science very seriously. Because if you think of the basic assumption that all of us who are scientists have, that is, we believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe. And it's interesting to me that scientists of the eminence of Eugene Wigner and Albert Einstein use the word faith. They cannot imagine a scientist without this faith. Because, of course, they point out that you've got to believe in the rational intelligibility of the universe before you can do any science at all. Science doesn't give you that. Now, the interesting thing is this. Suppose we now look at that issue against the background of the two worldviews we're discussing tonight, atheism and theism. Atheism tells you, at least Richard tells us in his book, that since human life has been cobbled together by unguided evolution, it's unlikely that our view of the world is accurate. Quite so. And if you are a reductionist, as you must be as a materialist, reducing beliefs to the physics and chemistry of neurological structures, then it raises a very big question, ladies and gentlemen. If in the end my beliefs, my theories, my scientific theories, are the results ultimately of the motions of atoms in my brain produced by an unguided, random, mindless process, why should I believe them? In other words, it's like someone said...
Yes. This has to do with kind of like determinism and the belief that all our thoughts are going to be just random you know, atoms in motion, in a sense, matter in motion, more specifically. And it leaves you to the question of, well, why should I trust that, right? If these things which are just matter in motion are, you know, at play, and it's just like all determined matter hitting each other, why should I have any need or rational ability or, you know, thought to trust, right? This is where we're going to have to necessitate for there to be any consistent thinking in immaterial soul. You're not going to get a consistent thinking with a material organ just by itself. You necessitate something which is inanimate, which is immaterial, which is a soul, for consistent rational thinking. It's something that science can't, offer, of course.
Sitting on the branch of a tree, cutting off the branch on which they're sitting. And it seems to me that therefore atheism actually undercuts the scientific endeavor very seriously. And that, for my mind, is a fatal flaw. An argument that purports to derive rationality from irrationality doesn't even rise, in my opinion, to the dignity of being an intelligible delusion. It is logically incoherent. But theism tells us that the reason science is possible, the reason that I can access the universe, at least in part through my human intelligence, is because the same God who created the universe is ultimately responsible for the human mind in here. So that's the base level. But when we come up a level now and look at science itself, we have the fine-tuning of the universe, the fact that the basic constants of nature have got to be very accurate in order to have a universe just.
Now, the fine-tuning is a very interesting argument. I think there's an issue in saying, I think I have an issue personally with the leap of going from like there being fine-tuning in the universe to there necessarily exists a God which is omnipotent, etc. I think a better argument is like Aquinas' teleological argument, which is based off consistent metaphysical truths. So that's my thoughts on the fine-tuning argument.
Just like this one. Now, I know that some people prefer, that's the word that Sir Martin Rees uses, an explanation in terms of a multiverse, which actually doesn't, in my opinion, solve the logical problems. But I'm very interested in the verdict of Arno Penzias, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the microwave background. And he says astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with a very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. So that physics itself, looking at the constants and the very, very specified numbers they had to have, comes to that kind of conclusion. And incidentally, the Bible gets very easily dismissed, I'm afraid, also in the God delusion. Penzias added, the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. It's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, isn't it, that we only got the idea that the universe had a beginning, evidence for it in the 1960s. It was very exciting, I remember it well. Because for centuries, Europe was dominated by the thinking of Aristotle, which put the earth fixed at the center of the universe, everything rotating about it and everything existing eternally. The fascinating thing is this, that when evidence began to arrive that there was a finite beginning to space-time, some leading people in the journal Nature, the editor, Maddox, said, this is dangerous. We don't like this because it'll give too much leverage to those who believe in creation. Now, what I find very interesting is this. The Bible is frequently dismissed as being anti-scientific because it makes no predictions. Oh, no, that's incorrect. It makes a brilliant prediction. For centuries, it's been saying there was a beginning. And if scientists had taken that a bit more seriously, they might have discovered evidence for the beginning a lot earlier than...
The only thing I would say in regards to, like, I agree the universe had a beginning, but I think currently our only mode of, quote unquote, like evidence for this is going to be divine revelation. And this is the Thomistic position that we cannot know from natural reasoning whether or not the universe had a beginning, right? And per accidents, this comes back to the per accidents causal chain distinction. And so we're not necessarily going to be able to reason that the universe necessarily philosophically or metaphysically had a beginning, as we can with a chain of dependency, a per se causal chain, or like an essentially ordered causal chain. We cannot know through natural reason, because for example, a per accidents causal chain, the common example is given is a father producing a son. Well, the son's existence does not necessarily need to depend on the father after the father has brought the son into existence, right? The son can continue to exist and the father cease to exist, and yet the son still produces another son. And so there's not a sense of dependency as we see in a per se causal chain. And so currently, I think we should be wary to base our belief in God based off of, arguments against or arguments trying to demonstrate the universe had a beginning. I think we should be very careful to put all our dependency on those type of arguments, such that we see in like William Lane Craig.
They did.
Professor Dawkins.
So I think if there's another good exchange, we're definitely not going to go through this whole video. I mean, we've already gone 2 hours and almost 30 minutes. So I'm going to see how Dawkins responds. And if it's anything interesting, maybe we'll continue forth, but we'll just get into it. We'll see how Dawkins responds.
I understand your desire.
If you guys have any questions, you can ask him as well.
In some ways, to respond to Dr. Lennox, but I think that this next topic and the excerpt I'm going to read will allow you to both advance the discussion of the next thesis, which is that design is dead. Otherwise, one must explain who designed the designer. I think it'll allow you to advance that well. The quote that I'm going to read, the excerpt, is on page 109. And what you wrote is this: the whole argument turns on the familiar question, who made God, which most thinking people discover for themselves. A designer God cannot be used to explain organized complexity.
No way.
Because any God capable of designing anything would have to be complex enough to demand the same kind of explanation in his own right. God presents an infinite regress from which he cannot help us to escape. This argument, as I shall show in the next chapter, demonstrates that God, though not technically disprovable, is very, very improbable indeed.
Very improbable.
Oh, why aren't they texting me back? Are they mad?
Oh my gosh. These ads. All right. Let's see how Dawkins responds.
First,
Who
I
made
find
God
it
is
deeply
a
unimpressive
crazy
that the Bible, it can be said to predict the Big Bang. There are only two possibilities. Either the universe began or it's been here forever. Just two possibilities. To get one of them is really not that impressive. Now, sorry?
At least it got it right.
Toss a penny, you've got a chance of getting it right 50% of the time. Design is dead, otherwise one must explain who designed the designer. Well, we skate over a lot when we say design is dead. I think probably John and I would agree that life is explained. Darwin explains life, and no serious scientist doubts that. So we go back to the previous, a rather more difficult stage in the understanding of where we come from, which is the origin of the universe itself. And that really is genuinely difficult. We don't know. We understand essentially biology, we don't understand cosmology. In a sense, we could say cosmology is waiting for its Darwin. John mentioned
one day we'll find it, as Dawkins said, we have people working on it right now, We'll figure it out one day. We'll figure out how the universe came to be. All right, Mr. Dawkins.
Answer to the previous question, the idea of the physical constants being finely tuned. And it's quite true that many scientists, many physicists maintain that the physical constants, the half dozen or so numbers that physicists have to simply assume in order to derive the rest of their understanding, just have to be assumed. You can't provide a rationale for why those numbers are there. And physicists have calculated that if any of these numbers was a little bit different, the universe as we know it wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be here. The universe would perhaps have fizzled out in the first yoctosecond, and so we wouldn't be here, or other things would have gone wrong. It's tempting, once again, to import the easy, facile idea of a designer and to say that the designer twiddled the knobs of the universe at the big...
This is personally why I don't like fine-tuning type arguments, and also arguments which are like... I mean, I don't like probabilistic arguments when it comes to like God's existence. I would say it's good in that it makes sense of the evidence, right? Because if God does exist, we would expect certain things. But arguments like this, I think, are a bit, insufficient overall.
Bang, and got them exactly right, got the gravitational constant right, got the strong force right, the weak force right, and so on. But it seems to me to be manifestly obvious that that is a futile kind of explanation, because, as the quotation says, who designed the designer? You have explained precisely nothing, because instead of just saying, oh, well, the knobs were tuned to the right values anyway, you say, oh, there was a God who knew how to tune the knobs to the right values. And if you're going to postulate...
I want to agree to some extent with Dawkins, and I would go about a different route, actually, in that I don't think we can know too much when we're using fine-tuning arguments, right? Instead of metaphysical arguments, if we're using fine-tuning like arguments, it's harder to know the nature and the essence, in a sense. What is this being, this fine-tuner like? What is his attributes? And I think a more sufficient response, which is even not probabilistic but demonstrative, is through arguments for, God's existence that we find in the five ways. And so, I don't think it's sufficient to go about the fine-tuning like arguments.
That, then you've in a sense sold the pass. Some physicists solve that problem by not invoking God, of course, but by invoking the anthropic principle, saying, well, here we are, we exist, we have to be in the kind of universe in which... I
muted my mic. So I think they're going down a different route. So I think I'm gonna end it here. If you guys have any questions, you can ask real quick. But other than that, I think we covered everything. Basically, I guess to give like a summary, we went over Dawkins' complete disaster of a book. Specifically his arguments against Aquinas, I will specify. The God Delusion, which truly the book itself is the delusion. I don't know who looked and read his writings on Thomas Aquinas and genuinely thought that they were sufficient in response to the five ways, as if his objections have not been responded to by Aquinas himself. So all I would simply say is that overall, Dawkins failed to go about destroying Aquinas. And for Dawkins, who is I believe a biologist specifically, for him to step into the field of philosophy with basically no knowledge and to quote mine Aquinas is such a unfortunate step. And like I said, I don't know who peer reviewed his book. They must have also not been, educated on matters of, what Aquinas had to say on the matter. So it's very unfortunate that this is what people look up to. And they genuinely think that this is a sufficient argument against God's existence. So this is what we see along with Majesty of Reason as well. Or not Majesty of Reason, forgive me. Rationality rules. in his argument. Indeed, it's weird that people make models such as the Big Bang for the reason I said. Best to look up and be memorized and cry. Yeah, I mean, to some extent. There's always competing theories. If you guys have any more questions you can ask real quick before we end the stream soon. But it looks like we covered everything. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was like a different stream. I want to do some more lively debates. This debate was like kind of dead. You know, it was an interesting debate, but there wasn't like a lot of substance. It was a lot of just like rhetoric. And I think I would say that, you know, Lennox did a good job at refuting Dawkins, but I don't think he really posited any good arguments to refute, or not refute, but to assert God's existence. I think that it was kind of lacking in... Obviously, I'm a Thomist, so I disagree with his fine-tuning argument. I think the fine-tuning argument is good, but I think, like... I honestly think that the Kalam cosmological argument is a better argument in that we can know more so about this being, who is God. But I think that inevitably the Kalam cosmological argument itself fails. So... It's tiresome to watch Dawkins. That's very true. Especially when he talks about like moral and theological and philosophical, you know, eras. Like, or areas. I think that he's good when it comes to the evolution. You know, he knows what he's talking about. But when he steps into the field of philosophy, that's where it falls apart. So if you guys have any more questions, I can answer them real quick. Yet again, if you guys want to help support me, you can send a super chat real quick. If you guys also want another way to support me would be either becoming a channel member, which is, you know, I think it's just like $2 a month. Or you guys can also consider buying my merch that I have in the link in bio. So, you know, I appreciate any help. Like I said, I appreciate you guys even being here and taking time out of your day. So, yeah. Obviously, a worldview which only accepts beings, empirical stuff, won't accept God. Yeah, exactly. Empiricism literally is a lacking foundation. I will be doing a critique soon, refuting the positions held by Hume and how Thomism refutes it. I haven't read into creationism. I don't see how Christianity is claiming how the world physically came about. Genesis and its relation to how every human develops consciousness. That is cool. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say simply that I don't think it's clear and evident that the authors were trying to demonstrate that God brought the universe into existence. I think that the authors were trying to demonstrate that position of Genesis, or the author of Genesis. But yeah. All right. I don't know. I'll just wait for a couple more questions if you guys have anything else to say. But yeah, it was a good stream. I want to do more streams like this. If you guys want to recommend me maybe some debate reviews, I want to get more in depth into, you know, those fields and those debates which pertain more to what I've studied. Because, like, obviously I don't use fine-tuning. I mean, I can critique fine-tuning and my issues with it. But, yeah. What did you study? Thomism. Specifically Thomism. Scotus Dawkins. I mean, at least Scotus had somewhat of a foundation. Or not even somewhat, he did have a foundation, you know. through Aristotelian philosophy and logic. Dawkins has zero foundation for any of his claims. But yeah, so I think that should be sufficient. Thank you guys for joining. I appreciate you guys watching. I think I'm gonna end it now. Any more questions I can answer real quick, but it was a great stream. Like I said, recommend me. If you guys want to recommend me, you can do it in the comment section, because I think after this live ends, I won't be able to see it. But if you guys want to recommend me maybe some debates to review, some videos to review, to critique, you know, Aristotle versus Aquinas, when they work hand in hand. I think that, well, Aquinas utilized Aristotle, so they didn't verse each other. Debate Wayne. It's all right. I would mutilate Wayne in a debate. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Yeah, I'm gonna head out, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you for all the support that you guys received.